So, gentlemen, interesting conversation. So, what can we do about this? Are there ways to kind of fix this situation if it needs to be fixed? Do we need to do something? Is it regulation? Is it clawbacks? Is it say on pay? Is it something that we can restructure the boards to do? Or are we just going to have to live with this?
I think you see that there's regulatory or governmental solutions. That's a possibility, but one which I tend to discount. My background is law. The one-size-fits-all kind of pay ratio thing doesn't seem realistic to me, given the size, variety, complexity of different businesses and industries that we have. The say on pay, we have yet to see whether that makes a difference. I have some doubts about that. I think our best hope is for better board governance, and I think John and I probably have some things to say about how that might be.
I think the best companies have addressed this by declaring what they mean by great performance, by declaring what kind of rewards they will make to their C-suite when we experience great performance, by saying what kind of ownership they want their management team to hold over a period of time so that their interests are directly aligned with the owners of the company, and by making quite transparent how they make decisions in the board compensation committee. And the best compensation committees, in my experience, just assume that everything they decide is going to be in the newspaper, and decide that they're going to speak plainly about how compensation is managed. That's sort of the best solution I see from the company side. On the regulatory side, I don't expect to see shareholders try to get control of compensation in any direct sense. You know that a relatively small percentage of the shareholders say on pay votes turned out negative. What was the percentage?
2%.
2%. And I just don't expect the shareholder to gain that kind of control. So I don't think that's a viable way to control this kind of compensation. I think board compensation committees feel in an intense way the responsibility of managing this issue for most companies. Certainly there are some extreme cases that strike me as being just out of hand, where the CEO has gained the upper hand even with his outside directors. And the cases I'm thinking of, it is men who have gained that upper hand and are winning the tournament in part by manipulating their fellow board members. I think of that as the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah. Don, you brought up the issue of board governance. You have more to say on how that might be improved to deal with this executive compensation issue?
I think John mentioned a couple of pieces there, the being transparent with the shareholders to the extent that that can help. We've talked about clawback provisions, and interesting to me that in talking to a colleague, she referred me to another colleague at University of Maryland who actually does compensation consulting. And I talked with him briefly and mentioned clawback provisions, and he said, no, we'd never accept that. And I noticed he said we, and I gathered from that, that he's saying the good people are not going to accept the idea that they might be punished. They'd be offended by the very suggestion. I think that's a very interesting insight/comment. I'm not so sure I want someone in my organization who would be offended by the kind of proportionality I suggested before. We're going to reward you big time if you perform well, but there is a downside. It's not all, heads you win, tails I lose. So there might be an interesting approach there with clawbacks. I think that you have to also, and the Ethics Resource Center, which has been around quite a few years, has suggested, why not include ethics as one of the metrics? Now, they're not real specific as how you do this, but it occurs to me that to the extent that, and you mentioned the press, if your company is in the press for some sort of scandal, it may not rise to criminal or civil liability. There should be something in the compensation package that rewards executives who run a good culture, run a good corporate culture, and those things don't happen, that they take responsibility for that. And certainly if there are criminal fines or civil liabilities, that should they be unscathed when on their watch, these sorts of setbacks happen for the shareholders either reputationally or economically. So building in some ethics metrics to the compensation package might be a very useful thing.
I would just add that we sometimes overlook that there are market penalties to some of these things. There have been some terrific academic studies showing that if a company has to restate its earnings because they were incorrectly reported, there are significant penalties to the price of the stock of the company. And even though I don't especially care for Mr. Diamond at JP Morgan Chase, he has suffered significant consequences in the loss in the value of his stock holdings and his stock options in the company since the revelation of this, you tell me, $2, $4, and $9 billion loss that happened because of the whale in London. So there are consequences exacted by the market that often go unrecognized, and a package disclosed in the proxy statement as having been, say, $50 million may turn out to be worth substantially less because the company hasn't performed well.
Right.